The Munich Security Conference is the thermometer of our political and foreign policy status in the Western world, maybe even the world at times. We're supposed to be enlightened about where we are, what the state of affairs is, and we were just in the antechamber being asked how many times have you been there. I've been there at least 20 times. So this is a something that you can't miss at the beginning of the year to understand the year, and it is especially important during a time when we have a reordering in the world going on, where we don't exactly know where we stand and we don't exactly know where we're going. So it is a very important and continues to be a very important instrument of understanding the foreign policy world. This time was no different. But this time I want to mention one thing: the German the DGAP, the German Council. I still struggle with the translation of it into English. Had a role that it didn't have in years before. We had at least 20 different events, and that we did small scale, big scale, for members, for the younger group. Content laden, others were receptions. There's a whole way of using the Munich Security Conference as a platform on top of a platform. We've tried that this year and in the last couple of years, and it was very successful for the stewardship and the get together of those who are in the DGAP community. So it's important for the world, it's important for this country, and it's even important for the German Council on Foreign Relations, though for different reasons. It's been a tradition to have a readout event here for all those who didn't get a chance to be there, to get a little sense, get a glimpse of what this conference was about and what was talked about. And this year, again, we have a good panel to help us along and understand that. My colleague Jan Stöckmann will introduce those who will speak to you, and I will get out of the way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thomas, and thanks to all of you in the room here who made it in adverse weather conditions, and to all of you tuning in on Zoom. The title of this event is Lessons from the Munich Security Conference, but we will not be lecturing from the panel. We want to have a conversation. We want to interpret things. We want to look at the things that were overlooked, and perhaps also share some gossip. And to do that, I'm delighted to introduce our panel today. To my immediate right is Stephen Erlanger, who's the chief diplomatic correspondent for New York Times based in Berlin. He has reported from more than 120 countries and has been bureau chief in a number of places, including London, Moscow, Paris, and Berlin. He has won numerous prizes, including 2 shared Pulitzer Prizes, and has also been made a Knight of the Légion d'honneur. On his journalism ethics statement, which all of the New York Times journalists have, he says that he wants to, quote, listen more than speak, and to have his own opinion to be something of a mystery. Can I ask you tonight, Stephen, to inverse that? After that, we'll hear from Professor Cornelia Woll, who is president of the Hertie School in Berlin, and who's a political economist focusing on economic patriotism, trade and industrial policies, Europe, and business-government relations. Herself a dual French-German citizen, she holds a binational PhD from the University of Cologne and Sciences Po Paris, and completed a habilitation in Bremen. Before coming to Hertie in 2022, She held various senior positions at Sciences Po in Paris and at the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Sciences, as well as visiting professorships at Harvard and Frankfurt. Her work has been published in leading journals, and there are a number of books, not all of which I'm going to mention. The most recent one came out in 2023 with Princeton. Welcome, Cornelia. Last but not least, to my far right is Dr. Patrick Keller, who is the Deputy Director of our Research Institute and heads the Center for Security and Defense here at DGAP. He has spoken at numerous events over the past 3 days. I think he may have lost count himself. And the voice may have suffered just a little bit, but we're looking forward to hear from you. Before you joined us last year, Patrick, you held various positions at the Bundesakademie für Sicherheitspolitik, the German, the Federal Ministry of Defense, and at Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. Patrick is a political scientist by training, holds a PhD, has spent time in the US. And I read on your biography that you also enjoy American wrestling. I wonder whether this might serve as some sort of metaphor for what you are about to say. Now, before we begin, just some housekeeping. I would like to remind everyone that we are on the record and that we're recording this event. It will be uploaded subsequently. We will kick off our conversation here on the panel with about 5 minutes of intro remarks each. And then open up for questions and answers fairly soon. We will, perhaps most importantly, be serving Bavarian-inspired snacks and some beer afterwards for the conversation to continue. Now, before we begin, I just want to invite everyone to not only give a round of applause to our panel, but also to everyone behind the scenes who have, as Thomas mentioned, organized in excess of 20 events on the margins of the Munich Security Conference for DGAP. So more than 20 events at 8 different locations in less than 5 days. I think that deserves an applause before we even start. Now, Stephen, if I can hand it over to you first, if you could start us off with some of your highlights and perhaps more interestingly, some low points as well when it comes to transatlantic relations at this Munich Security Conference.
Well, it depends on how much you like Vice first, I suppose. I've been going not as often as Thomas, but I've gone many times beginning, I think, in the early 2000s. It's metastasized, this thing. I call it the Munich Security Circus now, rather than conference, because it has 97 different rings and lots of clowns and all kinds of things going on. You have side events, you have special bilat meetings, you run into people in the hall, which is really one of the great pleasures. I'm sorry, I always enjoyed seeing Madeleine Albright in the halls, but she's gone. But somehow I managed in one morning to run into Hillary Clinton 3 times, which some people might think was twice too many. I don't know, but it's a pleasure to see people. It's become a kind of alumni reunion. This year was particularly fraught, I would say, on transatlantic relations. Yes, there was the JD Vance shock, which, if you remember, I was in the room, a lot of people were in the room. Pistorius actually stood up almost immediately to object and then spoke later. But this was a very strange speech, as we all know, in which he attacked Europe essentially for having a larger enemy within than even Russia. And people were kind of appalled by that and thought it was perhaps an outlier. But it's clear with the national security strategy and other things, it's not an outlier. I mean, there's an ideological quality to the security bargain, which I think came home to people pretty much. If it hadn't by then, it certainly came true at Davos, where Donald Trump went on his weird rampage, insulting, mocking Europeans, including the poor former Swiss president.
and claimed he wanted to seize Greenland no matter what from a NATO ally. And I think this, if there was any other wake-up call needed, this was it, to basically understand, these people are not your friends. They're not. I mean, they may be your allies, and they may be invested in your security up to a point, but there's a big chunk of them that want regime change. It's quite clear. So Rubio gives a much more emollient speech. This was, after Davos, to me, a security conference for de-escalation. This was the Americans coming to cool things off, to say, yes, we love Europe, we're still there, it's okay. And Rubio's speech was incredibly well crafted. It was well delivered. I think it was also a bit of a poison pill with this weird, hazy fantasy about this shared cultural experience, which was a long time ago, right? Which was very white, very Christian, kind of ignored big chunk of the American population, let alone the European population, who are not Christian. And I found it very odd in a way. I mean, he praised German immigrants for making American beer better, but he didn't have much to say about all the Hispanic immigrants and the people who came in the 1890s and later. They talk in a way in coded language about migration. Partly what they're talking about is Islam. There's an element of racism to all of this. So I found it odd that everyone stood up and applauded. So many people, I think they were relieved that, because the words were emollient, and he said, we, about NATO and Europe, not you, not they. But as one senior official said to me, the problem is we underestimate the ideological quality of this White House. And Putin cannot divide Europe, but Donald Trump can. And I think that's a very interesting point. So I came away feeling, the last thing I'll say, I've gone on a bit too long, but there were three speeches of Americans that were interesting. Vance last year, Rubio this year, and Elbridge Colby, who gave a much more traditional national security speech where he said, I don't really care about shared values. That's not what we're talking about. The hosannas, the shibboleths about shared values don't matter. What matters to me is shared interests, and we have shared interests. And that pleased people, and it fit well with Merz's speech, which I saw, despite the criticism of America, woke issues are not our issues. I saw it as an appeal for repair of the relationship and not an analysis of rupture. Everyone loved Mark Carney in Davos talking about rupture. Well, rupture is a terrible thing. Rupture produces disorder, chaos, confusion. I think Merz is right. The relationship needs repair. It requires work on both sides to repair it. But the old order, in fact, is not dead. Everyone likes to say it's dead. It's not dead. The IMF does fine. The World Trade Organization's still working. The World Bank. There's a lot of the old order left to think about. So I took away that bit of optimism that one of our key allies, i.e. Germany, understands what needs to be done, is spending the money, and wants a relationship that is more of, if not equals, then of a peer relationship with burden sharing or shifting. That I saw as a good sign. I'll stop there.
Okay, and we'll talk more about how much we really understood what has to be done in a second. But let's stay perhaps with the speeches for a moment. Cornelia, in a LinkedIn post, you said that Rubio's speech felt a bit like a Valentine's present in a toxic relationship, it being delivered on the 14th of February. I wonder if you could tell us something about what you think that Europe should do to heal that relationship, which some would say is close to a divorce, a very expensive one at that. Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. And let me develop this a little bit further. And I also think it's important to think about Rubio's speech by comparing it to Vance, because for everybody in the room, this was the two moments were coming together. I was in the room when JD Vance spoke, and it was an extraordinary speech. But I remember I was sitting there listening to him, just thinking, what is he talking about? Because to a certain degree, when you first heard JD Vance, I felt like I was on the campaign trail somewhere in the Midwest listening to some domestic audience speech. And I was thinking, we're here to talk about international security, Ukraine, Gaza, pick your topic. What are you talking about? The freedoms. And I was upset that he was going off topic. I was going to downgrade him for a badly. And then I realized what the speech was trying to do. But it took me quite some time, because first I thought he just had the wrong speech for the wrong audience. So this was my reaction to Vance. Now, Rubio, I didn't make it into the room. I ended up in one of the overflow rooms, sitting with a lot of American friends and colleagues. And I listened to Rubio's speech, and he had given a signal. He had somehow commented before something that was conciliatory. So everybody was expecting him to be not as outright aggressive as Vance. But I was sitting there, and as he was speaking, I agree with you, it was a very well-crafted speech, but I think few people appreciate how much pathos he put into the speech. It was a love declaration. It was, we belong together, our destinies are intertwined, we have a history, my grandmother, German beer brewing. It was all these emotional references. And I was sitting there with all of my intellectual capacity, feeling warm and fluffy. And I was literally invaded by this happiness feeling where I was thinking, I feel so good. And I remember thinking this because I was looking around, and my American colleagues immediately said, what is this white Christian civilization rambling? But I was sitting there feeling warm and fluffy. And so it is, to me, quite understandable that Pistorius and whoever was in the first row immediately stand up for standing ovations, because, and that's why I absolutely agree with your analysis, the Germans, at least, the Europeans possibly, were sitting there wanting this declaration to be true. And I literally feel, I think about it now as if it was a Latin American soap opera, where you know you have an abusive husband. He comes back with the flowers. He says, but I love you. And the wife says, oh, we can work it out. And everybody enjoys this because they're sitting in front of their screen screaming, leave him. But the wife, of course, does exactly the opposite. So this is why I use this reference. And I actually think I just wanted to get you the emotional sentiment right. I had all the capacity to understand what's going on. I was feeling fluffy and comforted. That's why there was standing ovations. But I do think, despite the very theatrical talent that you had, and it felt like a very sincere speech. He cited his own two grandparents from Sardinia and from Madrid, leaving out the other 15 grandparents somewhere in Latin America. And it felt like such a sincere speech. And I think it was purely tactical, because what the speech did is appeal to those in Europe who want to repair the relationship, who want to go back to this nostalgia, who want to say, all we have to do is get our act together. Didn't you hear what he just said? We can fix this. And that doubt is exactly what the US needs to make sure Europe cannot act, because there's really two strategic visions of what has to happen next. There's this one where the Europe has to go it alone, more strategic, more autonomous Europe, and let's make that a meaningful action strategy. Or the one where we do this, a little bit of transatlantic relationship can still help us. And here's possibly where we may disagree a little bit. I don't think both are possible at the same time. I think there are choices to be made. And I actually think that this division between two different visions runs right through our CDU and was very emblematic of what Merz's speech did, and what to me was a bit of a disappointment. At one point, you have to choose your direction. Is it going to be the more strategically autonomous, stronger Europe? Or is it the attempt to to save as much as we can from this transatlantic relationship. And as long as there are people who can defend with reasonable amount of doubt that the transatlantic relationship will get us into the future, nothing is going to happen on the other front. So I do think it's a choice. And by delaying that choice with these flowers that were sent, the US is getting us exactly in the right spot. And why do I think it was purely tactical? Because for all the mumbling about we'll always be there together. He said together, I didn't count, but something like 25 times. It is us together, our destinies intertwined. But the meeting he could have had with all the different European countries on the night prior was something he didn't have the time to go to. And what was the first meeting he went to? With 2 meetings, Orban. And all the anti-European project ones. So how much is it worth to say we need a strong Europe and go to those who are eager to destroy it? And I think we have to really stop believing in the both are possible. So I'm quite impressed by the effectiveness of a little bit of honey and flowers onto our European souls, because I am a big transatlanticist. I think there are a lot of things out of the transatlantic relationship that we can still have going forward. But at one point, for security, for their security architecture, and also for the economic choices that we have to make, if we cling on to some vision of the past, we're not going to move forward. And what was also very clear for me from Munich is the speeches are sharp to a point where I think you can't get any better. There were a lot of smart speeches, and I am actually always very impressed by European leadership. I think we have very good people in the different countries and in the different organizations, but everybody, and Zelensky most impressively as always, put the finger on the spot where it hurts. It's not the analysis that's lacking. It's the next step that actually delivers something very concrete for Zelensky. It's the air defense systems or something that, he's been negotiating with. So what is the next action step we need to do, and how do we need to deliver it? And then, of course, Europe breaks into 27 different opinions if we manage to narrow it down to that few. And that's exactly where we got stuck. So the speeches, sure, is something to write about, to analyze, but what really we should measure ourselves by is the next concrete actions that are chosen. And for that, we need a strategic vision and a consensus. And I think that consensus has to be more concrete.
And we will talk about those actions in just a moment. But first, I want to give Patrick a chance to say a couple of words as well. Patrick, observers have said that this Munich Security Conference feels a bit like going back to its roots. The old Wehrkunde-Tagung, first in 1963. There were a lot of people in uniforms. There was a lot of military and defense tech. Right across from the Hotel Bayerischer Hof, a drone company had put up a gigantic billboard with a drone pictured on it. So what did the Munich Security Conference feel like for you this time around? You've been more than 5 times, haven't you?
Yes, thank you, Jan. Boy, those are 2 hard acts to follow here, and I would like to respond to a few of the things that have been said already, but I will try and answer your question as well. And I think I disagree a bit with what you said. I did not think that it felt like a return to the Wehrkunde Tagung of yore, if only for 2 obvious reasons. One is it is so much bigger and so much more international, and there were so many events on development and security, climate and security, various issues that would have never made it to the heavily militarized Wehrkunde of the past. So I think that is indeed a change that I would say hopefully is irreversible, that we define security in broader terms with more voices at the conference than we had prior. And another thing that I think is a big distinction to the Wehrkunde before is you might have seen a lot of military, but are you sure you saw a lot of American military? I didn't. I think there was a directive at the Pentagon that did not allow the top brass to attend in Munich, with only a handful, I think 3 exceptions, including the SACEUR, the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO forces. Nobody else was allowed to go. So you can interpret that as so many things that we can unpack here both ways. You can say, see, there isn't much of a unity within NATO, and this American political leadership is obviously not that interested in a strong NATO and a strong military alliance, because otherwise they would send their officers. Or you could say, well, maybe it's good news that the Trump administration needs to exert that much pressure on their top brass, because apparently they do not trust them. They might not be in their camp. Many of the top generals and admirals might be people who are not interested in invading Greenland or breaking up the NATO alliance. So maybe they are interesting people for us to talk to elsewhere than in Munich now. So maybe 2 or 3 points in response to what has been said. With the Rubio speech, I think I agree very much with both of you that under the sugarcoating, it was a very difficult speech to digest for us Europeans. I'd say for 2 main reasons. One is the obvious one, that after all the nice things he might have said, it was a clear message that is very much in line with every other member of the Trump government. And that clear message to Europeans is, you need to change. And if you don't change, this partnership will end. What he said is the US will only have strong allies. We will not accept weak allies. And he also laid out very clearly what in his view should make us strong, what we should change in order to become strong again. Stop with the climate cult, his words, it's a quote, the climate cult, immigration, stop deindustrialization. All of these topics that are very familiar from the MAGA populist agenda, he is injecting into our political discourse and saying, this is what needs to change for you to be strong again and be part of this West that I keep describing here, of this alliance and partnership. And I think this is the key point. When the Chancellor said, we do not accept the MAGA civil war here in Europe, I applaud him for that. But at the same time, I think he is overlooking the fact that we have this civil war already right here on our continent. You mentioned Orban. Rubio also visited Fico afterwards. So it is, these people are there. They're everywhere. They're in France. They're in Germany as well, these political forces. So what Rubio was describing was a West that was the West of the MAGA movement, if you will. It's more difficult and more complicated than that, but it was the West of the MAGA movement. It was not the usual NATO West that is based on the shared principles of the Enlightenment, of reason, democracy, rule of law, all of these shared values that are usually emphasized at the old Wehrkunde. That was not what he meant in his speech. So, and therefore, I think it was a very divisive speech, although it didn't feel like one, and it continues to be a problem. Now, what does that mean now in my realm of defense policy? I think in the end, whether you see it as a binary choice, as you said, that you either have to go the European way now, or you have to cling to a past relationship, whether you believe that or not, whether you believe that you can still trust Trump's NATO ambassador when he says in Munich with conviction that, yes, we stay in Europe, we remain committed to Article 5, yes, we will defend you in case of attack, if you spend 5% of GDP, and we will continue to provide the nuclear umbrella as a matter of fact, of course. Whether you believe that or not, in the end, Trump decides and his whims, and the next Greenland is just waiting around the corner. But if you believe that or not, the clear task for Europeans remains the same. We need to get stronger and more united. We need to get better at playing the power game, to self-assert ourselves, our way of life, our interests, our beliefs in this great power politics world. And that means we need to get serious on defense, we need to get serious on competitiveness, innovation, economic strength, and also diplomatic unity. And that, Jan, is the last point. I know I'm speaking too long. This is where I, for one, was a little disappointed at this Munich Security Conference, because I think that the Europeans missed a couple of opportunities here to push the ball forward in that direction. One thing that I still, maybe I'm a bit naive, but one thing that I still cannot understand is why Merz, Macron, and Starmer need to have their individual speeches. Why can't they appear together as a trio on this stage and pass the ball along each other? I know there will be complaints by other European states that are not represented, but by and large, it would be the important symbol. I think it's a missed opportunity. I think it's a missed opportunity that the Chancellor, he gave a very fine speech outlining the balance that you criticized, which I loved, by saying we can do both. We can get stronger as Europeans while keeping the door open to transatlantic cooperation in selected fields. I think he hit the sweet spot on this balance, and that was a good job. But he did not give a suggestion on what to do now to make us stronger. There was no new initiative, no new announcement that was actually happening. An announcement is not enough, something that he actually does. And of course he has to do it. Macron is weak because of the domestic political situation. So is Starmer. Who else is going to do it if not the Chancellor? And our defense minister gave a speech that was all very well reasoned. Of course, the brigade, all the talking points. But if you struck out the word Greenland from Pistorius' speech, I think he mentioned Greenland twice. If you struck that out, you could have given the very same speech 2 years ago. Very same content. That doesn't make it a bad speech, but it makes it a missed opportunity. At a time where everyone, even in Munich, is saying we need to speed up and scale up. We need to be faster and bigger in our ambitions in order to play this power game. You cannot give a speech that you could have given 2 years ago.
I'm glad you're bringing up Greenland, because this is something I wanted to follow up on, to get from the conceptual level to some of the very specific conflicts that were strangely absent from some of the speeches, at least from the public. I was not in the hotel myself, but perhaps, Patrick, you could tell us if you, in your conversations and the events that you spoke at and attended, saw any progress being made on either Ukraine or Greenland, Arctic security, let alone Iran, which we haven't mentioned at all, really.
Maybe I was not in the inner circles where actually progress was being made, but I didn't see much progress. But there was a lot of talk and a lot of exchanges on all of these topics. And what I took away, for instance, on Greenland is that this issue is not over, but that virtually everyone agrees that while the Europeans are trying to, push the can down the road, creating a process, on, how can you serve American and NATO security interests in the long run by coming up with a new mission or any other kind of regulation for Greenland, or doing the same for the economic part of it, the mining the minerals and all of that. These are the things that are being talked about now. It is, Claudia Major said at our DGAP event, she said that's a rational answer to an irrational demand. Trump might wake up any day again and say, well, this Greenland thing, where are we at? Maybe we should invade. And then we are back to where we were. On Ukraine, I am so glad that Zelensky gave this fantastic, emotional, versatile speech in the main program, because otherwise Ukraine would not have featured prominently enough in the main debates. Of course, there were many Ukrainian companies there and a huge Ukrainian delegation. But again, from a European point of view, this is our war. This is our key conflict. If we don't manage to help the Ukrainians come out of this war in an acceptable, stable, somewhat hopeful manner, it will be our problem in spades. And where are the initiatives on that? Maybe there was behind closed doors, but I didn't hear much progress on that either.
Okay, well, as I said, I wasn't in those rooms myself, but perhaps others. Two more quick follow-ups for the other panelists, and then I want to open it up quite quickly. So please get your questions ready here in the room and also online. If you're online, there's there's someone here in the room who's playing the advocate of the Zoom audience and who will pass on the questions to the room. But Cornelia, before we open up, I wanted to come back to what Europe can do. The Council of Foreign Relations President and former U.S. Trade Representative Mike Froman wrote a piece following the Munich Security Conference saying that he was quite happy how the Europeans were singing the right tune this past weekend. But he also went on to say that if he had €1 for every time that European leaders vowed to complete the European project and achieve strategic autonomy, he could buy a lot of Bavarian pretzels. So I wonder...
He could buy Greenland.
So I wonder how many pretzels you were able to buy this past weekend, and where are we going in Europe, really?
Yes, and maybe let me also say I criticized Merz for trying to do both at the same time. That's typically what one criticizes of Emmanuel Macron, who's called the president of yes, but also. So both at the same time. I think the my expectation, request, or what I would like to have is, of course, we want to preserve whatever is still working in the transatlantic relationship, even build things into the future. And of course, Europe needs to get stronger. But there will be a lot of decision moments where you have to prioritize one over the other. Where exactly do you buy your equipment from? Who exactly do you rely on? How much dependence on this particular U.S. company in digital in the digital sphere is good or bad? And I think when there is a conflict, it should be automatically and always a stronger Europe over some transatlantic hope, because there's this irrational element that I think we have to simply acknowledge. That gets me to the more concrete question: what exactly I would expect? That's why I think the speeches are not the most relevant part. The speeches all have the analysis right. I think nobody disagrees with Europe needs to get stronger. But let's talk about something like the nuclear umbrella. One of the things where I think we're further down the road than last year is conversations between France and Germany on sharing that umbrella and with some sort of arrangement. That's good. But you also had this Munich Security Conference, Pedro Sanchez take the stage and say that the one thing he's worried about is Europe going into nuclear deterrence, and that he really wants to warn against it. And I think it's the worst development for us to go down. It would be a mistake in history. I'm taking this because this is really an existentialist question for the European defense capacity. And I just talked about only 3 leaders. I have no idea how they would take the stage together, and they're very relevant for this discussion. And of course, anybody who works on Europe, which I actually trust most people in the room have done a little bit of, knows that on every single issue, it gets down to very nitty-gritty, 27 countries not being able to come forward with something that is that requires a consensus. So really, it's about the institutional architecture, even for things like the single market, where we thought we'd already gotten there, and we realize we can't. So without an institutional reform of the European Union, I think most foreign policy and security questions will just never get anywhere. So I'm deeply pessimistic unless we actually move into reforming some of the decision making.
Thanks so much. And I'm sure we'll have time to speak about some of the measures, Euro bonds, the European nuclear deterrence in some more detail as we go into the Q&A. There's plenty for you to respond to, Stephen, but I also wanted to ask, because you mentioned some of the low points, and you talked about the 3 different speeches at Munich. If you could help us Europeans identify perhaps some silver linings, and some Americans who were in the room that Europeans should seek out, give us some hope, in other words, for the future conferences.
Yeah, I think people get depressive. I have to say, I'm not as depressed. I mean, partly because if Europe decided to go on its own, It would take 5 to 10 years, and it would take spending 6, 7, 8% of GDP. Just forget it. It's not going to happen. I'm sorry. You know, I mean, we are fated to live together. And I think, you know, if the European partner does more, we will have a happier relationship. That's where I come out. America, as you know, is very deeply divided. As bad a campaign as Kamala Harris ran with Joe Biden getting in her way, she lost the 3 states she needed by a total of 250,000 votes, which in America is tiny, right? I mean, you know, it's a very divided country. Americans like Europe, they like NATO, they don't like Russia. All the polls show this. The relationship with Europe among most Americans is very strong. It's intimate even. And so the Trump people are kind of weird, I'd have to say. And I'm not sure Trump actually believes in this MAGA stuff. I mean, Trump used to be a Democrat. He used to be pro-choice. He used to be lots of things. Vance is an odd man who became a radical Catholic as an adult. So he's someone who's been looking for belief all his life. I've read his essays on St. Augustine. I mean, he's a very strange guy. And MAGA is a minority even within the Republican Party, which is itself a minority. So I think, you know, it is true that Rubio went to Orban in the middle of a campaign, and he went to Slovakia briefly. His audience is the White House. His audience is one guy, you know, the great godlike president who doesn't want to destroy NATO, because everyone says to him, oh, godlike president, you saved NATO. You made them spend money. Why would you destroy them? You know, you can manipulate this man this way. So you had very interesting Democrats there. Some of them flew on their own dime because the House was in the middle of a tense vote. One person who impressed me a lot was a woman named Elisa Slotkin, who's a senator from Michigan, who's in her 40s, who's a Democrat, who served in the American Intelligence Agency, who comes from the great state of Michigan, which is crucial to any Democratic presidential hope. You know, there are people in the Democratic Party who care, and there are people in America who care a lot. So, I mean, this is kind of the hope that I take. And I think, in a way, Americans were probably more offended by Rubio's speech than any of the Europeans I spoke to, because it was a very strange fantasy picture of the United States itself. So, you know, you talk about a choice. There's a kind of a choice. I agree there's a choice. I mean, choice is about money. But if you're Germany and you don't have an army that functions, you buy equipment as fast as you can, as cheaply as you can. And I'm sorry, most of that's going to be American just from economy of scale. And if you're talking about a nuclear deterrent in Europe, that's really expensive. And the British don't even have 2 legs of the triad, and the French don't have 1 leg of the triad. And French president decides, Macron's about to give a big speech on nuclear stuff in a week or so, but the French president could be Marine Le Pen or Bardella next year, right? I mean, so do you want them with a trigger? Maybe you do.
I ask you to give us some hope, Steve.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying maybe the French will reculer and elect some nice center-right person in the second round by a whisker. It's always possible. But I mean, this is fascinating. And I'm doing a piece even about German military spending. I mean, pretty soon Germany will spend more on defense, I hope well, but more than France and Britain combined, without paying for the nuclear deterrent, which is hugely expensive. And so I've joked with people around Macron that strategic autonomy is a lovely idea, but learn to say it in German.
one other person who instills transatlantic hope, by the way, is our former president, Karl Kaiser, who was in Munich and attended several events and reminded us in a magnificent little impromptu speech he gave about the importance of those Americans who care across the Atlantic. So that was really moving, especially myself as head of the Karl Kaiser Forum that we're building at the moment. Anyway, I want to open this up for questions, and I saw that there's someone over there and someone over there by the door. If I could ask you to briefly say who you are, ask a question or make a comment, relatively short, and ideally address it to someone on the panel. We'll start simply for reasons of convenience right over there because the mic's there, and then we'll take up your.
Hello, my name is Law Campbell. I'm a research fellow at the German Council on Foreign Relations. I had a question more specifically about to what extent was Marco Rubio framing his question to a domestic audience to try and position himself for an election in 2028? And to what extent, even if there was either him elected or a Democrat being elected, that have a meaningful impact on the changing relationships? As far as I'm concerned as a Canadian, the relationship is damaged beyond a certain degree of repair. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, thanks. Stephen, do you want to take this one?
I would just say quickly, my joke is that if Vladimir Putin has created a Ukrainian nation, Donald Trump has created a Canadian one. I do think Rubio, as I tried to say, was speaking in part for the guy in the White House. Trump has set him and Vance up against one another as possible inheritors. Trump likes doing that. He likes putting people at an awkward position. He likes embarrassing smart people and humiliating them sometimes. And so there will be a fight for MAGA, whatever MAGA is after Trump. And Rubio, I think, wants to stay in the fight, put it that way. So yes, I think that's part of what was going on. I mean, people like Rubio because he tries to keep the train on the tracks. He actually does like NATO and so on. So I cut him a little slack on that score. But I don't know. I mean, the damage is real. I'm not saying it isn't real, and it's going to take a long time. As everyone likes to use these spousal metaphors, trust takes a long time to rebuild, and sometimes, despite all efforts, you fail.
Hi, my name is Duin. I'm a former student of Hertie School and I work in German politics. Thanks a lot for sharing your perspectives about this incredible place, Munich Security Conference. It's really unbelievable what happens there. This year I have not been there, but watching the many sessions on YouTube, you can still watch them. Also the session on Arctic security, which included the Danish Prime Minister and also the leader from Greenland. So I can recommend that session especially. I was wondering about, you focused a lot on the Rubio speech, which I of course understand. I agree that it was very conditional. I was wondering whether you could share a bit more about some of the other Democrats, apart from Stöckmann, and some of the other Europeans that you have not mentioned. Was there like something that you found really exciting, some session that really impressed you? Thanks a lot.
You're absolutely right. It is an exciting place. I've only been 3 times myself, but sometimes it feels a bit like a music festival with various stages, and you have various acts at the same time, and it's hard to decide which one to attend, and then you want to see your favorite musician. So I wonder if I could use that metaphor to pass it on to Cornelia first, perhaps, and Patrick to also get a chance to come in to name some of your favorite acts.
So I actually enjoyed a lot of the conversations that were not the big acts. I have to say I'm the best speaker of all times for me is Zelensky, because of the way in which he can make things very real with what seems like not a lot of rhetorical gimmicks. But he had a very appealing speech where he said how much Ukraine was fighting this war for everybody else, and there was in my mind, absolutely no way you could argue with him. And then he has the sentence, which is my favorite sentence from the entire conference, saying he was going through every Baltic country, Germany, everybody else that Ukraine was fighting for. And then he said, and we're also doing this so a certain victor can fill his belly and not worry about tanks returning to the streets of Budapest. And I thought that was just because usually when you make a joke at a conference like this, it turns against you. But that was such a smart way of singling out the one person that's dividing Europe on the relationship with Russia in a way that still gets a point across. That was very effective. Sorry, that was favorite song. But the organization, what they delivered for me or what I took home was actually a lot of the lower level discussions where you can get so many people from Europe, because Europe really is a complicated and complex construction around the room. And I was in one panel organized by Monika Sus and a lot of friends from Poland, and they asked, what does it take to have not just the business support, but the societal support for European security efforts, European army, any sort of effort. And to me, it is fascinating. Probably people in the room know too much about this, but it's fascinating how you really have a dividing line going through Central and Eastern Europe and the Western countries on the other side, where they're just the acceptance of participating in military service, doing civil preparedness, stocking all sorts of things in case of a military crisis in your home, having, somebody come in to talk to the 6-year-old school children about arms, etc., varies from the left to the right in very important ways, and to hear how is Greece handling this. I don't know if you realize that Greece, highly military country, still feels like it could be invaded any time. How is Germany doing this? Germany still likes to think that if you got rid of all the weapons, there would be no war. I'm exaggerating. To of course, the Baltics, the Nordics, and to think through collectively, what does it take us? What does it take so that we can get to the same place? And that includes what's taught in schools, that includes what you send out into different households, that includes, of course, military service and all sorts of other questions. To me, it was really precious to hear this, because I don't have the time to travel to all the other 27 countries, but everybody comes to Munich. So you really get that one temperature in one room, and that was fantastic.
Patrick.
My favorite part of the festival was the area of the German defense industry. I had a lot of meetings with people from MBDA, basically a rocket builder, Airbus, Helsing, others. I found that so interesting because Munich, first of all, is an interesting place to meet all these people, because it's such a hub where engineering, education, and big companies and also small startups come together, building very innovative, very competitive things. And it convinced me that I have to disagree with you, Stephen, although I hate to do that. As a rule, when you said that Germany can only rebuild its armed forces on scale, or the easy, the natural way to do it, the almost unavoidable way to do it was to buy American, because otherwise we wouldn't get the scale. I'm not at all against buying American in part. I think there is a lot of room for co-production, co-development, and so forth. And I think it would actually do a lot of political good to do that and not go Europe only. But I think it is very doable to buy primarily European and German product in rebuilding our armed forces. And this is something that I've, found true again by talking to these people there in Munich. I also think that it's politically smart to do that, because it's very difficult to sell to the German voter the idea that you spend hundreds of billions of taxpayers' money and don't invest it in your own industrial base and your own competitiveness. There was also the question about other American speakers that we enjoyed. I went to a nightcap, which you also can find because it was recorded with the NATO ambassador, as I said, the American NATO ambassador, Whitaker, but also two politicians from the Democratic Party. One was AOC, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, the representative from New York, who is well known for her left-wing agenda, but her very smart presentation on social media, very appealing to the young. I think Stephen can speak much more intelligently about that than I can. And she was with Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan. They both represent different sides of the Democratic Party, I'd say. The governor is more centrist than the representative. It's also a different age group, a different focus on what they... And I think that was very interesting to me. One could speak in great detail about it, but what I thought was really interesting about it is in terms of security policy, they vastly disagree. AOC, for instance, on Taiwan, wobbly is, to put it mildly. AOC on weapons deliveries to Israel, I don't know. It is a different kind of attitude, and it resonates among a large chunk of voters in the United States. And when they both talk about how they envision the future of transatlantic security relations, you can imagine that there is no return to the past. There will not be a moment like with Joe Biden, America is back. Even with an American president, with a Democratic American president, we will have to build something very new.
Can I just push you on that question of some of the things that may have been overlooked a little more? Because we haven't spoken about the kinds of things that you would put under the umbrella term of human security. Things like climate, things like health, other kinds of security that did play a role, at least in past editions of the conference, perhaps less this year. Maybe I didn't see them. Maybe they're not needed at a conference like this. So I wonder if not just you, Patrick, but the other two as well, if there are just other elements of security that were represented at the conference or that should have. What do you think, Steve?
Well, I always think everybody has their own Munich, the way everyone has their own Shakespeare. I mean, it's so big. I mean, you sort of deal with what's in front of you. You deal with the things you can get to. Half the things you sign up for, you can't get to because something else gets in the way. 12 people want to meet you all at the same time. And then Merz is going to do a backgrounder in the middle of all your great planning, and it all disappears. So I saw a lot of side events on these issues, certainly like on cyber issues and cyber warfare. There were some really interesting debates going, not necessarily on the main stage. And I think there was a fair amount, but I agree with you, probably less this year. This year seemed really all about what we do about Donald Trump. Thank you very much. And is America still credible, and is the guarantee credible, and is the relationship going to be okay, and blah, blah, blah. That's what seemed to really define everything. So I don't know. The one thing I would say I'd slightly disagree, or not disagreement doesn't matter. My perception was Zelensky gave a good speech, and I went to the Ukraine lunch that Pinchuk does with some of the best food, but Ukraine really wasn't a big issue. People are bored with it, and Europe has no notion of how the war ends, and they're committed to paying for it, but it ends, they hope, with Trump putting more pressure on Putin, which I don't see coming. So every senior official type I talk to about Ukraine, and talk to a lot of them, they see the war going on for at least another year. Maybe, I hope that's not true. Rutte spoke with pleasure that 30,000 Russians were killed in December and again in January, which is a staggering figure. But I don't think that ends the war. And then I did my own events, or I moderated an event on Gaza, which again, I think just fell off the agenda. And I'm ashamed of that, but that's one of the things that, you know, is real. And then we have a war brewing in Iran, and we didn't hear much about that either.
But maybe can I was battling with this because maybe Ukraine wasn't a big deal, but there was an entire Ukraine house this time. There was Zelensky on stage, and not just for one speech, there were 15 different events, including a political pub talk. I mean, Ukraine to me felt like it was everywhere because I was very frustrated about the absences, but I think it's also informational overload. I felt that we didn't talk about Iran a lot, and there were all these demonstrations in the street, but who am I to say this? They had Reza Pahlavi in an interview. I mean, how closer to Iran can you get than some of the things that they've actually organized? On the other human security questions, there was a whole panel on food security. There was a very good speech also on Alexander De Croo, the new UNDP, what's the title? Chief boss. I'm forgetting what the official title is, gave a very good speech about the link between development cooperation and security, and very basic security, like any of us would define it. Same for a lot of the other issues. So the issues were there, but did we find our way into all of these discussions? Probably not, because there were so many at the same time. And I somehow fear, and I was thinking this about the Middle East, to me, the Middle East was really absent. And I was already struck about this last year. This year, I couldn't find much of it, even in the conversations in the hallway. And it feels like there is so much turmoil in the world and so much really urgent things to address that nobody has the time to actually do all of them well. So my only hope while thinking about this coming out is I hope people are specialized enough that all those that will work on Iran have found their way into one room where they have hashed something out that maybe I didn't see. Because if that's not the answer, then there was too little time for too many really important problems.
I think it's administrator, UNDP administrator. I'm not sure. Anyway, more questions. There's one here, and then maybe we'll collect a few. Again, if you could say who you are and then address your question to one of the panelists.
Otto, University of Potsdam. I would like to question the view that a German nuclear deterrent would be expensive. First, the material is there. We have an enrichment facility in Gronau. We have lots of used nuclear stuff sitting in our house. There is in the burned up fuel of the high temperature reactor material for 12 nuclear weapons. We have a research reactor in Munich with highly enriched uranium. If we just stop that reactor and take the uranium, there will be plenty of stuff for nuclear weapons. That nuclear weapons are expensive, that was a view that was correct up to the 1970s. But now it's no longer valid, I think. Second,
your question?
Well, it's rather more a comment than a question. I'm sorry. Second, the main components of a nuclear deterrent are two: the weapon and the means to deliver the weapon. And the second, these are conventional technologies.
Okay.
And so if Germany rearms, there's a lot of conventional technology around to transport nuclear weapons if necessary.
Thank you. Okay, got it. There was one other question right over there. Klaus Wittmann, if the microphone is coming to you, I think we need the microphone because people are tuning in from Zoom and otherwise they won't be able to hear you. So we've got the nuclear question. I see Patrick's taking notes.
Thank you. Klaus Wittmann, Potsdam University. The Rubio speech, to a certain extent, was about reform of the transatlantic relationship. But reform in that speech meant subordination. In German, Neuordnung gleich Unterordnung. How did this appear to you? And a second thing that also always embarrasses me is if I hear the German Chancellor boast that Germany will have the largest conventional armed forces in Europe. Why does he not say, we are aware of our responsibility as the largest country in the center of Europe, and we will deliver in this and that way? Did you collect any reactions to this kind of boasting?
Thanks so much. I want to give people in the Zoom room a chance as well. And I see that my colleague Anna has a question from the room as well.
Yeah, thanks. One question in the online room was about how the developments or what they mean for Europe in the sense of, did you hear anything of like talks or developments that would maybe make new developments in the sense of European integration, but only for certain groups or smaller groups like coalitions of the willing, possible or more probable?
Got it. Okay, so we've got a question about European integration, various speeds, or coalitions of the willing. We've got the questions about Germany's largest defense forces, subordination, transatlantic relationship, and the nuclear question. Let's go in reverse order. There's quite a lot on the plate. Patrick, would you like to take it first?
On the nuclear question, there are so many obstacles to Germany becoming a nuclear power. The very first obstacle is legal, international law. We signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, we signed the 2+4 Treaty, and both stated clearly that Germany is not going to be a nuclear power. Of course, we can say now things have changed, so we change with it and disregard international law, but I think it would be a very big and also very unnecessary step. I believe we can arrange our nuclear protection in different ways. I myself would put a lot of faith actually still in the NATO arrangement there, even with this US administration. But I'm all in favor of having talks between Macron and Merz. I just hope that it will not distract from the main task, which is building conventional capacity in Europe. That is what we need right now. Because in the end, I don't believe that any German chancellor will use a nuclear weapon to stop a conventional attack. I just cannot imagine it. So in that sense, the nuclear weapon might even be somewhat useless for Germany in the situation that we are in. In that regard, Klaus Wittmann, Germany building or trying to build the biggest conventional army in Europe. I think the subtext of your question is, isn't that scary to our neighbors? If Germany attains that much military power, are they getting uneasy about it because of historical precedent? I myself did not detect any of that in my conversations with Polish colleagues or really everywhere. Although I could understand it if it was there, but I don't detect it at all. I think it still holds what Radek Sikorski said many years ago, that our neighbors are more afraid of a lack of German leadership, of German inaction, rather than of Germany becoming stronger and a strong leader in favor of Europe. Having said that, I think you're absolutely right. We can always stress and underline that we do not need these military means for our nationalistic purposes, but for the common European security. So, but I think in all fairness that the Chancellor is saying things like that often enough. And on the question from the Zoom room on the integration of EU, I think there are others here who can talk more intelligently about this than I can. But what I find is a common theme also at the MSC is that at least in the realm of defense, a Europe of various speeds or various degrees of integration or moving ahead is very welcome. And to serve a ball to you maybe, I've heard a couple of people say from the banking sector and financial institutions saying that maybe we should get ahead with the capital markets union because that was the best way to create foreign investment that would help us to scale up our industry the way it is needed.
I will hand it to Cornelia in just a second, but two quick points. Jana Fix has a great article in Foreign Affairs on the scare of the German hegemon. And then actually Wolfgang Ischinger in an interview in the Internationale Politik quarterly special, which, by the way, our editorial team managed to distribute in Bayerischer Hof to hundreds of participants. Wolfgang Ischinger made this interesting proposition of giving as a gift to the Polish 1 to 2 free submarines as a way of sort of showing that we're willing to pay for European defense, and as a symbolic act of answering to the whole question of reparations, etc., etc. So there are some ideas out there that may or may not be realistic, and so let me just hand it over to Cornelia to answer the question on Europe and potentially all the ideas as well.
Yes, let me get to the economic aspects, but I just wanted to agree. I haven't heard any reservation about German might, and the Chancellor's speech who quoted Sidorsky in the speech. I'm more afraid of German. How does that translate? Ich fürchte deutsche Macht weniger als deutsche Ohnmacht, and I really think that's the dominant theme of all the people who are there, but there's a huge selection bias. The Munich Security Conference is filled with people who are very relieved to finally see all the different powers wake up to their military responsibility. I think the interesting question is, how does that then, how is that received once you get out of these circles? And for me, the debate in Germany and other countries about military conscription or just armament in general is relevant because there can be a very big backlash, not from the people who go to the Munich Security Conference, but from everybody else. And of course, politicians have to take that into account. But let me go into the economics. Yes, I think everybody on procurement, on building, even building joint equipment says we have a financial problem much more than we have a technical problem. Who is going to invest, do the long-term investments and fund these projects if we stay in our own capacity building? And the money that can go around is not effective enough because we're lacking capital union. So I heard capital union or savings and investment union, as it's called now, evoked over and over again. But I also heard all the hybrid issues, all the threats that are the geoeconomic discussions of this world. And there was a lot of that as well. How do we get our digital sovereignty back? Isn't our the loss of our digital sovereignty exposing us to the threat, which is basically interference in our elections? And the fact that far-right parties may win in France, in Budapest, in other, Moldova just bought their elections back. But isn't that the threat? Because once these parties are in power, we're actually going to unravel from within. And that is first an economic question, who builds the platforms that we're using for our digital activities? And then it is a question of how effective are we to push back against interference in the domestic institutions. And I really, if I had one thing to pick where I really think we need to up our game very, very quickly, it's not the nuclear arsenal. It is making sure our elections stay free from interference, because they're not. And the Moldau example now shows us you can price how many % of the vote costs what, because they are now even say 10% of the vote will cost you this many billion. And we know how much it takes for us Europeans to buy back some percentage of the vote of what will happen in Hungary. I have a radical proposal to make is let's invest that money, because that would really be worthwhile a lot. And I think we have to take these discussions up one level too.
Yes, probably one of the cheaper ways to save democracy, actually. Stephen, did you want to respond to the question about the nature of the transatlantic relationship?
Well, yeah, I would also say the other problem with the European military is not nearly enough is being spent on R&D, particularly compared to America, let alone China. It's really shocking, actually. And so a capital market would help, venture capital would help, lots of things would help. I mean, I've lived in Europe a long time. I've paid a lot of European taxes. I think Europeans should yes, get the benefit of defense spending in terms of jobs and so on, but without question. The question is what can be made at the right price, at the right technical level with cooperation. I once made Ursula von der Leyen very angry when she was German defense minister, not her finest moment in her career, I think, when I suggested on stage in an interview with her that Germany, with all its money, if it didn't want to build a big army, at least it could buy things for other people. And this did not go over well, though I think it's still a pretty good idea. Anyway, there are lots of things. The coalition of the willing, I think, is very important. Now, it got stimulated over Ukraine, right? I mean, this is something Macron got going, but one of its great benefits is, crucially, it brings Britain back into the conversation. I mean, after what, to me, and I covered it, was the tragedy of Brexit. Britain is a nuclear power. It has a tiny army, but it likes to fight. I mean, it's only about 70,000 people. When you compare Ukraine, it's about 800,000 people under arms, right? And so when we talk about European security assurances for Ukraine and we'll have troops in Ukraine, I say, well, how many from where? You know, if the British Army's only 70,000, and to have an assurance force, you need 3 times the number of the people who are actually there, because you have people there, then you have people getting ready to go, and there are people being trained to go. So I'm very skeptical about all of this, but I like the new tone. I like the fact that Europeans recognize there's a big issue, they need to spend the money. I also look out at 2029 spending, and I think Germany's going to have a political problem with all its military spending, if nothing else, with its neighbors. Nobody thinks Germany's going to march on its neighbors, but when you go talk to people in Paris, they are really anxious about this. You know, they're very, very anxious about the Franco-German relationship being unbalanced by all of this military spending. Look, Trump to me is a kind, still very sui generis. He's a great politician. He really is. He's funny. He's charismatic. He gets people to laugh. I mean, he's clearly a narcissist. He's childish. He's an autocrat. He's many things. But a bit like Ronald Reagan, there are few things that he is probably right about. But I don't think you can have Trumpism after Trump. That's all. And he's 80 years old, and lame duck-itis comes to every American president, even though he's trying to push it off. The Republicans are already maneuvering about the next presidential election. They're going to lose the House in the midterms. It's going to be close, but they will lose the House in the midterms. It's going to be different. It may be better, it may be worse, but nothing changes politics change very, very quickly. So I'm not a huge pessimist. I do believe the Pentagon cares about Europe. High US officials tell me there won't be a lot of military moved out of Europe because they're no use in Asia anyway, these people. I mean, what the Americans are worried about is special forces and special equipment, and some of that may leave, ships. But I do think, whether you like it or not, America's here to stay for quite a long time.
See one more question all the way in the back, and then one more from the Zoom room as well.
So my question is...
This is Tim Hofmann.
Yes, Tim Hofmann, editor at Internationale Politik. In the run-up to this Munich Security Conference, there was a lot of debate about the participation of AfD politicians. I think, I don't know if for the first time, but AfD politicians were officially invited. So my question is whether or not this had an actual impact on the conference, whether this was a topic in Munich, and whether there was perhaps even an official meeting between representatives from the Trump administration and AfD.
Got it. Thank you. So AfD presence, and then Anna, if you could read one more question from the chat.
Yeah, speaking of missed opportunities and forgotten topics, like China also wasn't a giant topic at MSC. So how do you see that? And would you say that, we're focusing too much on the transatlantic relationship and thereby like missing the threat that China also poses to our security?
Great. Okay, and let's take a third one. I think, did you want to ask a question? No?
One first. Okay, yeah. Actually, following from the China question, having been to the occasions around Munich Security Conference for 4 years in a row now, it always seems like the main stage is very transatlantic, the podium. I mean, besides Wang Yi, I'm just wondering about, how is it different this time? Like, you have the General Secretary of ASEAN, you have the Singaporean delegation. Like, is there more focus on Indo-Pacific issues, for example, in the conference? Yeah. My second question is, very quick one, is going back on the imbalance of Franco-German relationship, like Germany spending 200 billion euros. That is very much overwhelming for many other European countries to catch up, because think of France with its fiscal constraint, So how would that weigh for the French, for example? How can you make cooperation much more coordinated? Because it's not spending. Like, Europe is not the spending, it's the quality of the spending and the coordination at the end of the day.
Okay, thanks. Okay. So we've got AfD, China, and cooperative defense spending. Who'd like to start? Cornelia?
I have a one line on China. I think the fact that Wang Yi was following directly after, who was it, Rubio, with a very clear, distinctive line, made China, to me, relatively present, because Rubio said we are linked together by our civilizations, yada, yada. And Wang Yi said, China has a very strong civilization, and it certainly isn't yours, but we can cooperate. And that was a very typical liberal institutionalist, let's work together call that I think resonated a lot with the room. And yes, there were Indo-Pacific discussions. There were a lot of participants that usually don't come. So I think there was a room for it, unfortunately, as we were saying with the music festival, to actually find it into the different rooms was sometimes hard, but it's still reassuring that they're coming and that for them, this is a relevant discussion. So I think that's reassuring.
Patrick, do you want to go next?
I think someone here on the panel said that the Rubio speech was a bit of a poison pill. And I think you could say the same about the Chinese representative in what you just said, because to me it was an obvious positioning of China, saying that now that the US is withdrawing from many of the institutions, especially the United Nations, China is filling the gap. And to them, it's easy now to present a story of harmony and international cooperation because they control many of the levers or are trying to do so. So they changed the narrative a little. They're very smart about how to fill the gaps that are left now by the United States. But I think nobody should fall for that in the sense that it's not driven as much by their particular national interest as it is in the US as well. And speaking of pills, I just want to encourage everyone that the reassurance that Stephen just gave us all, that America will stay with us for a very long time.
Like it or not.
Like it or not, the reassurance is very welcome, and I hope you're right. And I think we will work for it to become true. But please don't take it as a sleeping pill. It doesn't mean that we can say, oh, the relief is palpable. Please, you will stay anyhow. So maybe in the end, we don't have to do all the hard work on defense, on competitiveness, on our political reforms in Europe. No, you will have to do it. We will have to do it together, because otherwise we will not have a partnership with the US that is worth mentioning.
Did the AfD presence make a difference?
I didn't meet, I think there were 3 parliamentarians from the AfD invited, Rüdiger Lucassen, the defense spokesperson of the parliamentary group in the Bundestag, and 2 no-names who couldn't explain it themselves.
So record, we salute them.
Okay, so okay, okay, so but I think there was, well, I didn't meet any of them. I didn't see it. To me, it didn't make a difference. And I didn't meet anyone who was talking about it. But there was one thing that was at least covered very well in the press, and that was that Sarah Rogers, the Undersecretary of State, I believe, from the United States, who is very active in the MAGA movement and in all of that, and in building relationship to the extreme right in Europe, that she was meeting at the sidelines of the MSC with the foreign policy spokesperson of the AfD parliamentary group, but that meeting didn't come to pass in the end. So that was all I could notice.
I mean, it's also worth noting the AfD was kept out for the previous 2 years. It had been there before, and I mean, Ischinger made a point of having them in a small way this time, which as a Auslander, I thought was fine personally, but, you know, this is a sensitive issue, clearly. On China, I agree. I was also struck by Wang Yi's attack on Japan, which prompted a really strong reaction from the newly elected, quite conservative prime minister's government. I'm sort of puzzled by something, I have to say, talking to different people. What is Europe? Okay, fine, it's complicated, but why isn't Europe standing up for multilateral institutions in this visible, vocal way? Why isn't it fighting back for the UN, right? I mean, it's important for Europe, right? These multilateral institutions are important for Europe. I mean, the Chinese will take over the UN otherwise. They're already on the way to doing it, right? Now, maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's not, but I find, and again, forgive me for being a foreigner, but I find Europe kind of passive in defending its own belief system. And after all, what does the multilateral system do? What does the European Union do? It protects small countries from predator nations. That's what it does. So I would like to see more oomph on that score too, I have to say.
Can I add 2-finger? I think you're being a little unfair, because I do think
my job.
that's your job. But I mean, I don't want to point to our former foreign minister now touring the world, fighting for the UN in her new role as the president of the General Assembly. But Annalena Baerbock did give the pro-UN speech to the European Parliament in this multilateral role. And the Germans have, you know, for all that they can do is development cooperation, for example, has a lot of the funding being cut. They have tried to prop up whatever has been left. They've now gotten one. What is Cocarico for the Germans? We have one thing to be proud of, which is that the UNDP offices that are moving out of New York because nobody trusts the Americans anymore are now moving to Bonn. So we're building more multilateral presence. That is a recent.
And filling empty office space in Bonn. That's great.
Absolutely. Bonn is going to be our multilateral city now that we have this. So I do think that the Germans are very committed to the multilateral institutions, and rightly so. But I also wanted to say, you asked, why don't we use the Bretton Woods system? IMF is doing well, and some of the things that are in place. I see a real risk from the Chinese undermining these institutions by just having constructed their own alternative in as a lender of last resort through the Chinese banking system and in a lot of other economic cooperation elements. But I will defend the Chinese just for a second. They've done so because they haven't gotten their place in the Bretton Woods organizations in any meaningful way compared to the size of their economy. So we as Westerners do have to get ahead with the reform of the multilateral system. We have a multilateral system that was built for the post-World War II period, and it's outdated. And the Chinese have just built something that is a competition. I don't think we have something to fall back on. Either it's a new multilateral system, or it's the Chinese version, or it's something that the US will dictate with all the priorities that they currently have. I know how many parts in the US will go back to some of the more reliable functioning that we're used to, but I just think the risk we're taking is too big, and the risk might be the same in France. I don't know what will happen in 2027, but it's just one country. The US is the entire system when it flips, so that's just a huge risk to be exposed to.
Okay, final question. Omid Güland, make it a crisp one.
Thank you. We've talked about transatlantic relationship dependencies and what Europe has spent money on, but we didn't touch one crucial topic which can or has the potential to change the whole way of living, and this is artificial intelligence. There have been 4 actors present at the Munich Security Conference, which is Amazon, Meta, Microsoft. What's the 4th?
Google.
Thank you. Alphabet. These 4 companies plan to spend $650 billion in 1 year on R&D for artificial intelligence and the infrastructure belonging to it. The European Union plans to spend $170 billion for the whole R&D within 4 years. How will this change the debate we have today in the future?
Thanks for that final question. A couple more problems to solve. Can I invite all of the panelists a very brief closing statement answering this question, and then perhaps also just a little look ahead to next year's MSc, or just this format of the conference in general. Where do you think this conference has to go in order to remain important and drive the kind of debates that we had today forward in the years to come? So AI and the future of MSc. Let's go in reverse order of the panel. Patrick first, and then we'll go with Cornelia and Stephen to close.
Thank you, Jan. On the AI question, how will that disparity in money and effort affect the future of international politics? I think the honest answer is nobody knows. It is absolutely unclear where this AI race will lead. Will it lead to a capacity in economics, in designing societies, in security that is the equivalent to the nuclear bomb, thereby shaking up all the rules of warfare before, or at least many of them? Nobody knows. But what is clear is, to me, that if AI is so important in the future of how our societies work, how we exist as human beings, then the numbers you just cited are just another indication that we as Europeans should do well in sticking with the Americans as long as it's, viable and doable, and as long as it makes sense, because we obviously need then to have this kind of cooperation. What we need to do with the money that we have and with our technological prowess and our ingenuity is we need to find the choke points in the supply chain for AI and the various outcomes of it to play a meaningful role there as well, and try to make ourselves indispensable. Where should the MSc go? I think they're on a roll. They will just continue to grow and do what they've been doing for the last couple of years until the Bayerischer Hof just implodes from the amount of people walking the floors.
Cornelia.
So they had an elephant this time. They have to find something bigger next time. Maybe that's a dinosaur or some mammoth. I think we know one thing about AI that is not nobody knows. I do think we know it'll be profound. Whatever will happen, AI will have a profound effect on the security landscape and on anything that is the development of our capitalist system. So thank you for the question, because yes, we didn't. At one point you said R&D, and I was thinking AI, and then I couldn't. But that's where I think the future is, which Emmanuel Macron, in his speech, had a whole thing about the tech bro capitalism. I don't know if that's the term he used, but that we need to also defend ourselves. And that's why the whole Digital Service Act and other discussions really are about security in the end. And I think at MSc, you'll tell me what your impression is, but everybody knows that all of AI is dual use. And when we talk about artificial intelligence, we're talking about security. And that is what I also think the future of MSc holds, but already does very well. I find the Munich discussions to be most interesting on the startup tissue. By the way, the startup tissue in Munich, somebody said this is a very interesting area for some of the development, including the universities that are there. TUM had their own panels that they organized, some of it on the engineering outlooks are really fascinating. And, even if you talk to the big boys in the room, the Germans do talk about Rheinmetall, but we've heard so much about Helsing. Now we've heard so much about some of the drone technology. And I do think that discussion on what is the defense industry and what actually is part of it and needs the kind of support, including, do you want to spend your money on this or on all of them? And who is the incumbent and who gets to, is going to be a very important discussion. For the industry, it's important. For us, it's important. And I do think AI is a big part in this. And it'll lead me to conclude, if we don't get all the new kids on the blog into the room, including the one, it's not the GAFAM, it's not the Googles and Metas, it's already open AI. And I'm wondering whether I want Elon Musk or Donald Trump to decide about my future. I'm not sure which one I would answer. So you do have to get incumbents into the market, and you have to make sure, and that'll be my final line, the market is a market. It's not a market currently. There's oligopolistic behavior of a wonderful book called The End, How America Gave Up on Free Markets. There is no competition in these markets anymore. So the one thing that Europe does well is fight for competition, and maybe that's the way forward.
Okay, so that's future of MSc left to you.
Well, I'll be brief. I mean, the problem with AI is you'll have to ask AI. That will give you a kind of answer. No, I mean, it will be profound. And I worry as much about the military aspects of this. I worry about, machines fighting machines without people in them, right? But AI, in a way, it's going to change our economies. Yuval Harari compared it in a way to a horde of new immigrants or refugees taking jobs away from people. And it's going to have big political impact, no matter what else it does. So I don't know. I mean, it's part of me is attracted and part of me is scared, but part of me is always, I find some AI very weird because it's always trying to please me. I ask it a question and it gives me the wrong answer, but it thinks it's the answer I want. And then you challenge it and it says, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry about that. I mean, that's scary to me. The future of MSc is bright because it's the one place, well, there's a place in Italy too, but I mean, it's the big place for Americans to come. I mean, it is the transatlantic center, and I think it's very important to the transatlantic relationship. It tries to broaden itself out. I don't know. I mean, I would love them to move to a more convenient place, but I know they never will, it's becoming, harder and harder to actually work there as a working journalist because there's nowhere to sit. And there's nowhere to work, right? And it's so crowded. And, even if you have a decent badge, you can't get into the main hall half the time anyway, because it's reserved for the deputy under assistant secretary of something for Moldova, right? Which is fine, but makes it hard. But I'm a big fan. I've been going for quite a long time. It's very important to me. And I think it's important for Germany too. So the future, I think, is hellish. It's great.
and the German Council on Foreign Relations will surely be present at future iterations of MSC. Please join me in thanking this wonderful panel. Please also thank all of the people behind the scenes. And please join us for some beer and Bavarian snacks outside for further conversation on all of these interesting questions that we've been debating. Thank you.